great extent, the current conversation in the United States makes no sense outside of the United States, because the Supreme Court has steadfastly stayed away from a conversation about the rights of the embryo or the rights of the mother, and has instead focused totally and exclusively on a unique American conversation about federalism. Should the states decide? Should the federal government decide? Should women be allowed to decide? But from the perspective of halakha, this is not really the most important decision. The most important decision really is, what should the undergirded law be from the perspective of halakha? What do we want secular abortion law to look like actually? I don't really care, for the purposes of this conversation, whether the federal government decides or the state government decides. I'm much more interested in discussing what the law actually should be. If halakha could fashion an abortion law for a secular state, what would that law look like actually? This question, of course, has relevance everywhere, because we could ask the same question about Israel or many other situations. And I guess it's extremely important to understand that from the perspective of halakha, the question of what should a secular abortion law look like isn't the same as the question of what does halakha say the status of the fetus is. Because we all know that the basic question about the status of the fetus is in dispute. There are two schools of thought in halakha, and this dispute is ancient and not modern. One school of thought, led by the Rambam 1,000 years ago and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein 50 years ago, is that essentially the fetus is a person, and abortion is only permissible in situations in which the rules of pursuers, the rules of Broyde, permit the killing of a human being. Even though the fetus, in the Rambam's view and in Rabbi Feinstein's view, is less than a full person, the basic prohibition of lo tirzah fully and completely applied, even though it's not capital murder. Standing in opposition to the Rambam and Rabbi Feinstein is Tosfos in the time of the Rambam, and the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg in contemporary times, who maintained quite diligently that abortion is not murder, it's some lesser prohibition, and is permitted in situations in which lesser prohibitions are permitted, maybe even only lesser rabbinic prohibitions, and that abortion is a health matter. And like many health matters, we would permit an abortion merely in situations in which the health of the woman benefits from the abortion, far below the standards necessary to permit an abortion. So this matter is in dispute, and all attempts to resolve this dispute are unsuccessful. This matter is in dispute. So the question is, what do we want secular law to look like? And the answer to that question is very important, but it's not really driven by halakha. It might really extensively be driven by secondary concerns halakha might have. Rabbi Moshe David Kendall, Rabbi Feinstein's son-in-law, and a person who was incredibly committed to the idea that as a matter of native halakha, abortion was murder, nonetheless, is perfectly comfortable making the following claim. We are uninterested in having secular law resolve these disputes from the perspective of halakha. When we look for secular law to act, we don't look for secular law to resolve Jewish law disputes. Rabbi Tendler is quoted as saying, "My father-in-law, the late Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, felt very strongly that allowing government to legislate in any area of morals and ethics gives them a toehold in religion. And if you let them in a little bit, the government will begin to expand its role in this area and start legislating what it's proper to teach and what it's proper to do in a religious context." This idea drives a group of important halachic authorities to make the following claim. Jewish law has no interest in having secular abortion laws governing in any significant way. The argument goes as follows. We don't view secular law as the place we look for morality or religion or faith. We look for secular law to expand opportunity and increase our freedom to act consistent with our own faith. And even though we know that this freedom will subsequently or simultaneously be used by other people in ways that we think are sinful, we don't care. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein puts this forward in his conversation about time of death, where Agudat Yisrael, a very, what we would call Haredi group in America and in Israel, asked Rabbi Feinstein what we want in secular time of death law. And Rabbi Feinstein said, we want the government to let everybody decide time of death for themselves. And we have no interest in having the secular government legislate time of death. Let them merely accommodate every person. This idea, which is what we want from the secular law, is not the true and correct answer. But instead, what we want from the secular law is accommodation of every person to go ask their own hosei, their own halakhic authority, what they think they should do, and then secular law to give them the freedom to act on it, is a very strong model of what we want secular law to be. And when you say to us, but in this model of secular law, don't you know that some people will have abortions that are sinful? We smile nicely and say, yes, we do know that. But it's not our place to control the morality of everybody in order to make sure that everybody conducts their life according to Jewish law. Maybe all that Jewish law wants from a secular abortion law is the freedom to conduct itself as every religious person sees fit. This idea, which is, it's not the place of secular law to enforce godly morality, puts a different spin on abortion law. It recognizes that since abortion is not capital murder, it's only a violation of the godly component of murder, but not capital murder. Maybe Jewish law doesn't really want from secular law anything other than our personal freedom to act. Let me add, by the way, a most startling example of that. Maybe, by the way, Jewish law doesn't really care as well about secular euthanasia laws. Just like we don't really care about secular abortion laws, we just want the freedom to act. Maybe when somebody wants to kill themselves, we're not really opposed to secular law permitting that either. It's only when people hurt other people against their will that Jewish law deeply wants secular government to be involved. I think our main concern, Rabbi Yonah Rees of the Chicago Rabbinical Council writes, as Jews must be that we be able to practice our religion freely. There is no right to abortion in Jewish law, but there are cases, such as when a mother's life is in danger, when abortion is unfortunately necessary, and there are other cases, depending upon the stage of the pregnancy and the medical or psychological issues in question, when a rabbinic authority might rule that an abortion is permissible. We want to maintain our religious liberty to implement any such lenient ruling when applicable. This idea, which is we are not looking for the secular government to enforce morality, but instead we are looking for the secular government to enforce freedom, is an extremely important idea, and it impacts dramatically on the question of what does Jewish law think secular abortion law should be. This is not the same as what Jewish law thinks the halacha. This is about what we want from the secular government. Thank you very much.